planning meeting, but note that the chair of planning is a leave of absence, so it's up to someone to nominate a chair. Deputy.
That you chair the meeting?
Seconded by Councillor Posselt.
We don't need to second it.
Sorry.
I don't think we need to second it, do we?
Oh, okay. Sorry. All those in favour say aye.
Aye.
Against say no.
Question, Lord Mayor. So the chair's on leave of absence and we've got other elected members on leave of absence as well?
Doesn't matter for planning.
Ask the question.
Oh, sorry, yes, we do. So we've got apologies from Councillor Coates and Councillor Sherlock.
Thank you very much.
Okay. So confirmation of the minutes of the last meeting.
Yes.
All those in favour say aye. Against say no. Carried unanimously.
You don't need to second it, Lord Mayor.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Right.
Supplementary items, we have none. Okay. Are there any indications of pecuniary and conflicts or conflicts of interest in any of the items? There being none, we will move on. Is there any transfer of agenda items? None. Move on to the Planning Authority items and consideration of items with deputations. Moved by Deputy. Unanimously. So we'll bring that to 23 Kirksway Place. Now, before we get into the deputations, we have had a request for an additional deputation from Kath Charmaine, is it? So Kath did not make a representation, but she would like to make a deputation tonight, and there is no sort of statutory rule around this, so it's really up to the committee. So I'll put to the committee that we allow Kath to make her 5-minute deputation. All those in... Oh, would someone like to move that?
So just a question, so she hasn't put in a representation? No.
It was the chair's call. I'm happy to move that.
Moved by Councillor Harvey. All those in favour say aye.
Aye.
Against say no. Carried unanimously. Okay, so our first representative, Gina Sidhu and Scott Bellis. I invite them to come forward. Would you like to come forward and sit at the table close to one of the microphones so that your voice can be picked up by the live stream? So you have 5 minutes to make your deputation. And then if there's questions from the floor, then that can add to your time on your representation.
Thank
Please
you,
go ahead.
Chair. Thank you, Lord Mayor, councillors and aldermen, for your time today. I'm here with my husband, Scott. We are the next door neighbours and have lived at 27 Kirksway for over 19 years. We know the developer from footpath interactions over the years and waves, and we have also performed this very dance before in 2011 when we came to council in exact scenario previously. That development application was not dissimilar to this one, and it was ultimately taken to Rampat and mediated with consent between us and the developer. So our representation covered elements of the Sullivan's Cove planning scheme provisions, and it's 16 odd pages. I hope that you've had time to read it, but the things that we really just want to focus on is that we generally feel there has been little or no effort paid to respect the heritage implications from an adjacent or adjoining properties. The bulk and appearance of the proposal is contrary to the scheme provisions, and the proposed height sits well above the historic roof lines. There's little or no effort to respect the heritage guidelines. It does not present as a respectful or subservient proposal to the suite of heritage historical cottages, which is a unique form in this particular area. It's quite unique for Sullivan's Cove compared to the Battery Point scheme. And the proposal is starkly prominent when viewed from all vantage points, including Kirksway Place and the adjacent properties like our backyard. And we want to note that this was a perspective which was largely ignored in the development application, as the focus was overwhelmingly from Gladstone Street, where different building forms exist, and from our view does not align with 23.2 objectives. We further challenge the notion put in the DA that the proposed size of the build is required for project viability. The scheme does not include a criteria for project viability, and as such is not a valid justification to approve that proposal of an overheight allowance. It detracts from the embedded criteria of heritage considerations or proper urban form. We do acknowledge the considerations put by the architects in their brief to reduce the overviewing to neighbouring properties, such as us, because that's changed since the last time, and how the balconies are, angled away from us, from our back garden, and it's more sensitive. I also know the Play Street Landscape crew, so no questions there about the credibility and the robustness of their work. I guess primarily what we want to note is the discretionary height put forward for this proposal, which is beyond the scheme acceptable use limitations, and the maximum height of the building is 14.35 metres above ground level. We don't feel that this is appropriate within the discretionary allowance of the scheme, and contrary to the heritage guidelines of the proposal does not present as being subservient to the existing heritage properties. It's blatantly conspicuous, can be viewed from all the sidelines, even those largely ignored, as I mentioned before, in the DA. The commentary made in the Irene Inc. reports that the proposed bill could not be seen from Kirksway Place, and in spite of council planner requests for full and better particulars of the elevation perspectives, they were not forthcoming on the basis that apparently they would not be viewed from Kirksway Place, and we just simply cannot understand that. We've looked through the plans, and they are DA 03.04 through to DA 07.04, where the rooftop pavilion is clearly seen from the Kirksway Place footpaths and Sandy Bay Road on both sides of the road. And we understand the issue of height and size of the build was referenced by the Urban Design Planning Advisory Panel earlier this year on the 21st of February, and that the panel was broadly unsupportive of the proposal. Their concerns were around whether the design was too prominent and included too many different ideas and not respectful of the area, the lack of respect given to the context of the adjacent heritage buildings, and their lack of conviction that the proposal would not be individually prominent and would not, and therefore not respectful of its listed heritage properties. So all those are scheme provisions. And finished off, the panel also mentioned that the proposal, questioned whether the proposal could be compliant within the scheme.
30 seconds.
Tell me that. We were caught short. We had just shy of 24 hours to read the agenda papers and the planning report. So there's an awful lot that, we'd like to raise and question, but can't. It's really about the planning provision, whether it fits and it's compliant with the scheme, the legalities around adhesion of title, and then if, for our protection, a dilapidation survey or the building that will be excavated down, which is so close to our boundary.
It's time, thank you. So any questions for the representatives? Councillor Lohberger.
Just through you, Chair, I'm sorry I have to ask the question this way. Has the proponent spoken to the neighbours about this? Has there been any consultation?
I'm sorry,
Did you
I
hear
didn't
that question?
No.
Directly with us? No.
Further questions? Deputy Lord Mayor.
Thank you. Through you and thanks for your deputations. I'm just wondering how, do you think there is improvement or any sort of change in this proposal compared to the previous one?
Thank you for the question, Deputy Lord Mayor. My initial reaction was, oh my God, it's bigger and badder than before. But that was just the initial reaction of 270 odd pages of the DA. Thankfully, Scott's much more calm in that regard. So yes, I would say yes, it's better. In the design aspects are more attractive, definitely more approachable. What worries us though is the even though we, as I mentioned, we appreciate the 1+2 architects' vision of privacy, even though that's not something within the scheme, but the privacy of the wall adjoining us so that we're not overlooked. It's massive, and the plans are not easily understood as to how big that wall's actually going to be. It appears to be almost less than a metre from us where it commences. So, but again, I'm not a builder and it was a bit hard to work it out. And I think just the sheer size, the over height of it is probably not as approachable as it, as it could be.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Any further questions? I might just ask a question. You said you were caught short. How was that? Did you, you obviously put in a representation, but you just
Yes.
weren't sure of when it was going to come to council?
No, Mr. David Banks was awesome. He rang me and let me know. We're just working, so I didn't actually get to access the agenda and the meeting docos until after 5 yesterday. And yeah, just kind of hit panic button at about 4:37 today.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for your deputation. You can return to your seats now.
Okay,
Thank you. Now I'll invite, so I'll invite Phil Gartrell and Kath Hall from 1+2 Architects to come forward for the applicant.
Unless you wanted to take the other representation.
I'll do that afterwards.
Sorry, are we hearing from the person who didn't put in a representation?
That last, 'cause I was just giving priority to the people that had made their... Okay, you've got 5 minutes as well.
Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Great. My name's Kath Hall. I'm a project architect from 1+2 Architecture, and this is Phil Gartrell. He's a planner from Irene Inc. Thanks for the opportunity to speak tonight. This application was originally lodged in November 2020 and is before you tonight following a nearly 3-year process, culminating in tonight's recommendation for approval. From the outset of this project, it has been our client's expressed desire to be both a good neighbour and to make a respectful and positive contribution to the project's broader urban context. This has been achieved through an investment in high design value architecture which demonstrates best practice in contemporary contextual design. The proposal is considered to be proposal is not considered to be individually prominent by virtue of height, bulk, scale or overall design. It's a contemporary design and presents a form that appropriately responds to the character and physical characteristics of the 4 cottages at 23, 25, 27 and 29 Kirksway Place. It incorporates significant facade articulation and setbacks to reduce the height, bulk, scale such that it is not significantly higher or bulkier than the adjacent buildings. It retains a strong street edge, reinforcing the pattern along Gladstone Street, which the scheme identifies as a desirable characteristic. Amenity impacts towards neighbours have been carefully considered in the design, incorporating appropriate setbacks and orientation from balconies and outdoor space to minimise overlooking and retain privacy to adjoining properties. Landscaping has been provided to assist with integration and offset the loss of the existing trees. Council's expert planning and heritage officers have undertaken a robust and comprehensive assessment of this proposal and have concluded that it meets the relevant objectives and schedules of the planning scheme. They have recommended approval on that basis, subject to conditions. This view is also shared by the Tasmanian Heritage Council. We would like to clarify and respond to some of the representations that have been made. On heritage, the proposal does not conceal nor dominate the cottages. When viewed from Kirksway Place and Sandy Bay Road, the proposal is substantially set back behind the cottages so that the cottages retain their prominence. The proposed demolition of the low heritage value veranda to the rear of number 25 Kirksway Place enables the creation of a forecourt between the proposal and the cottages, revealing their high heritage value rear facades. The proposal has been thoughtfully and expertly designed to complement a context of mixed age and heritage value without mimicking or replicating historic forms. This approach is generally required by the Sullivan's Cove Planning Scheme and the Tasmanian Heritage Council. On height, scale and visual impact, care has been taken to reduce visual impact and visual bulk through stepping back the height away from the boundaries, articulating the building forms and varying the setbacks. The Gladstone Street facade wall is the same height as the adjacent cottage eave height. The upper levels then step back away from the street to reduce their prominence. The Gladstone Street elevation is more uniform to reinforce the strong street edge of existing buildings. There is a perception that it is fortress-like. However, it is not a large facade when compared with the adjacent cottage. The proposed facade windows sit perpendicular to the street to protect privacy and orient towards views and sunlight. The building form is not boxy as suggested. It is articulated to reduce its bulk. The proposed roof pavilion is a small area and the roof terrace is significantly set back from all boundaries. On neighbour amenity, the proposal will not overshadow the lower level of Salamanca Mews, which is to the northeast of the proposal. Our southwest elevation that faces the site is usually in shadow. The retaining wall on the northern elevation of the Salamanca Mews site is on the Salamanca Mews site and already limits access to views and daylight from their lower levels. An existing wall approximately 3 metres high and 14 metres long that is close to this same boundary wall will be demolished. The proposed balconies and all windows have been carefully designed and oriented to minimise direct views to neighbours. 29 Kirksway Place is a commercial use. Their rear yard is used for parking. In relation to 27 Kirksway Place, it has not been ignored. Our modelling demonstrates that there is negligible effect of overshadowing from the proposal to this dwelling. Even on the shortest day
30
of the
seconds. Sorry, 30 seconds.
Even on the shortest day of the year, their windows are in full sun by 9:30 a.m. Earlier shadowing is predominantly caused by Salamanca Mews. The proposed building wall that is parallel to the boundary with 27 Kirksway Place has been purposely designed to retain neighbour privacy, which they have acknowledged. A condition of approval to revise the finish of this wall to suit the neighbours' requirements would be acceptable to the proponent. Thank you. We're happy to take questions.
Any questions? Councillor Posselt.
You mentioned that the height of the street wall was the same height as the adjacent Georgian cottage. As the eave height, correct. I'm just wondering by what measure, because obviously the topography means that the land falls away. So is it a straight line of the same height?
Yes.
So it would be substantially higher relative to the footpath at the low point. Is that fair?
It's slightly higher. It's probably
Whatever the
between
fall.
about 700 mil and maybe about 2.5 metres higher at the very low end. But yeah.
Do you have the capacity to provide an exact measurement for how much higher it is
Yes,
with the fall of the land?
we can.
How much higher is?
So at our
It's just this dimension.
yeah, so that's 7.1.
Round level.
Oh yeah.
Speak into the microphone, please.
Talking to each other.
Yeah, they're just figuring it out.
When they do.
It's probably 1 metre to 2.4 metres higher, but it reads as the same height.
Sorry, are you able to provide an exact measurement? 1 to 2.4 metres is a significant...
It's 1 metre at the high elevation, closest to the cottages, and it's 2.4 metres closest to Salamanca Mews.
Off the footpath level?
No, that's
Above.
the distance higher.
The distance higher.
If you have a look at the elevation,
Sorry, it's not high enough quality to read the actual number. Yeah. On figure 5 for us, we have that elevation, but we don't. It's too low quality to be able to read the number. So
I can assist there. On the left-hand side of the building, closest to 23 Kirksway Place, we have a measurement there to the top of the wall that is in line with the eaves. That height is 7.1, and as you get to on the same section of wall, that horizontal line continues in line with the eave height of 23 Kirksway Place, and the height above ground level on the right-hand side there, closest to Salamanca Mews, is 8.8.
8.8. Thank you very much. So that's a difference of 1.7.
Sorry, further questions, Deputy?
Yeah, for you. Just in relation to retaining vegetation, and can you just talk through the landscape proposal, please?
sure. The landscape proposal's been designed by Play Street. There's this, we are sorry that we've had to remove or proposed to remove the lovely tree that's on the site at the moment, but it is not in good condition, and the arborist did recommend its removal. In lieu of that, we've proposed planting around the site and on the building to soften the building. There's street planting within that facade wall that will both grow up the wall and cascade onto the street. So it's very much intended that the building becomes a green building. The rooftop is planted, and there's a significant amount of planting of birch trees, which is proposed by Play Street, to the northern corner of the site. So Salamanca Mews will benefit from that amenity. The forecourt is mostly open in order to reveal the high heritage values facade of the rear of 23 and 25 Kirksway Place, but that will be a kind of a green paver, so there'll be, we're hoping that will have that appearance that it's not just a hard space, but it has a softening to it.
Thank you.
Further questions, Alderman Bloomfield.
I've been looking at, on page 35, we've got the picture showing the walls on the side there. They're very large, very almost brutalist, I suppose, the way they've done, and I know this has been designed to fit in to the area. Why no windows? Wouldn't the windows have softened this somewhat? Because this is a very hard line. And I think this is...
As I've stated already, the perception is that it's fortress-like, but in fact that part of the wall that looks the largest part of that wall is literally the width of a bedroom, and it's 2 stories high, it's 2 levels. Now, we haven't put windows in that wall facing the street for a number of reasons. One of them is loss of privacy to those bedrooms because there's a big apartment building over the road that's many, many stories high. Also, the windows are designed to be oblique to the road. They actually look down the street to Salamanca, and that's also the way where they get the morning sun. There's no advantage of having any windows in that elevation.
That's...
Sorry, another
Sorry,
question.
I was just going to say, but it's not just the one on that street, isn't it? A little bit on the other side as well. I mean, I can appreciate that that's probably looking more into neighbours. It's just such a large area to have nothing breaking it up, but I think that's...
I disagree. I think that the elevation will be broken up by the way we treat it. There are small windows in that wall, but the way we treat the facade with stonework and artwork that we are proposing to do and is a part, has recommended as a condition endorsement, we'll be able to demonstrate how we intend to do that.
Further questions, sorry. Councillor Harvey.
With the removal of the trees, there's some significant trees on the site, not registered trees as I understand. Are you proposing any sort of offset for those that you could help the council with? Like if you take away those 2 substantial trees, would you be interested in providing an offset somewhere else? As we know, that urban canopy is a significant feature of a city, and we've lost 55 hectares of urban canopy since in the last, 5 years or so. Sure. And to lose more urban canopy, if that could be compensated in somehow, that would be...
I believe that's the intention with the Birch Grove, and there's quite a large area. It's not coloured on the plans. It would be helpful if it was, but it is on the landscape architect's drawings that have been submitted with the DA, and the rooftop planting as well is intended to compensate for that.
Mm-hmm. And why did you choose birch trees?
You would have to ask the landscape architect that, and
They're
they are not here
pretty
today.
boring trees, yeah. Mm-hmm. Right.
Further questions? Any further questions? Councillor Kelly.
Thank you, Chair. Setback, was there any consideration to setback from the front elevation there? I mean, I thought that the current practice and best practices were to set back from the street elevation, which would give respect to the older buildings. Was that not something that could have been considered?
In the Southern Clove planning scheme, my understanding is they actually want you to build to the boundary. And that is what we've responded to.
Thank you. I'll clarify that later with Council's heritage officer.
I'd just add as well, we do have setbacks to the pavilion and some recession on that upper level, but ultimately the intention there was to try and keep a fairly strong street facade consistent with the base of the Kirksway cottages that face onto Gladstone Street, and also the fairly strong facade of the buildings on either side of the street going down Gladstone Street, which is quite a feature of that sort of initial area with quite strong street frontages. And we've created some setback on the left-hand side between the cottages to provide space and allow, as Kath has said before, to allow interpretation of those heritage buildings that is now will be in a better position to be able to interpret that.
Thank you.
Other questions? Can I ask a question? Just whether you would consider if the front wall was required that it was made of more of sandstone to be more in keeping with instead of the black sort of concrete look?
Look, we'd have to speak with our client initially, but I believe the permit conditions do allow a degree of flexibility in terms of the treatment of that front facade facing Gladstone Street. So there may be potential within that through condition endorsement to provide a slightly modified.
The client, our client, the owner, wishes to use the stone which is actually coming from the site excavation within that facade.
I see.
So now I do not believe that is sandstone. It's dolerite? Bluestone. And although it's not sandstone, it's still, in our opinion, very contextual because it's of the site.
Councillor Lohberger.
Chair, just through you, you sort of ran out of time a little bit, but you mentioned you might be willing to condition the wall with the neighbours on Kirksway Place. Could you expand on that a little bit now while you've got a bit more time?
Well, obviously, that's something we're willing to negotiate with them about or have that condition. As I said at the start, it's our strong desire to be good neighbours. I know it was mentioned that negotiation didn't take place. However, with the previous DA that was about 10 years ago, 1+2 Architecture were not the architects for that proposal. However, there were learnings out of that from the current neighbours, and we've taken those on board, and I believe that Martin does wish to be a good neighbour. So I think that we're prepared to obviously negotiate with them over what they would like to see on that wall. That wall does not have any windows in it on purpose so that there is no overviewing of their backyard.
Thank you, Chair.
Sorry, can I just clarify again, the actual, this big wall, is it concrete? Because there's in the list of materials, it just talks about dark concrete, light concrete, dark steel, steel balustrade. It doesn't talk about dolerite stone use.
I believe that it probably does in the actual written documents.
Okay.
Yeah, so it is concrete, and the intent is that the lower levels will be embedded with the stone.
Oh, I see. Right. Yeah. Okay, any further questions? Thank you for your deputation. Now moving on to... so I am moving on now to Kath Chasemore. Would you like to come forward? Would you like to come forward, Kath, please? Could you come forward?
Very much what was said tonight. I am a bit deaf. But I've come about the development in Gladstone Street, 23 and 25 Kirksway Place. I live in the sub-penthouse immediately below on the downhill side of that development. And the first thing I would like to say is that I think the plans are brilliant. I love them. What I don't like and can't accept is that I think that they are aesthetically totally incompatible with the streetscape and with the whole Battery Point ambience and aesthetic. That's the thing that I don't like, and that is why I'm here tonight, and that is my objection to them. And really, that's all I've got to say.
Thank you, Kath. Are there any questions for Kath? Could I ask you, Kath, just whether what exactly is it about the design you think is so?
I think that it is simply the cladding, for example, the squareness of it, the big cut out of the face that it faces onto Gladstone Street. And the other thing is, in spite of what the architect, I'm sure that it will deprive us of light at certain times of the year. My balconies are going to be about 9 metres from the edge of that building. It's not very far, and I'm on the 3rd floor. I dread to think about the people on the ground floor. I mean, they are going to be deprived of sunlight. There's no question about that. And I think that's a big issue. This is our building, Building 15.
Okay, any other questions for Kath? There being none, thank you, Kath, for your deputation.
Is that all? I go back?
That's all. You can go back now, yes. Now, I just want to raise with the committee that Mr. Chris Merridew has also requested to make a deputation. It's up to I can put that to the committee, whether you'd like to, if someone wants to move that.
Yeah, Lord Mayor, I think we were generous with one, but I think I'd rather not set a precedent where anyone in the room can decide that they want to give a deputation on spec. So I'm just conscious that we had one, and there might be others follow as well. Right. And just going into the future, I'd much rather think that people do it the correct way, rather than just decide on the night that they're going to give a deputation and keep us here for a lot longer. So my preference is no.
Okay, I've got it. What's Councillor Posselt?
Yeah, thank you. On this matter, I think that there's 2 points to be made. One is that it does enhance the democratic nature of what we're doing to hear from the community. Probably 3 points actually. 2, there is definitely a process by which we would normally, there are rules by which we normally accept these. But the 3rd point to make is that we have allowed one individual to do this tonight, and that it would be probably unfair treatment if we disallowed a second person who had indeed gone through the same process as the previous person.
I'm going to move it just to see if anyone wants to move it. Councillor Posselt, it'd have to be 5 minutes, obviously, for Mr. Merridew. Yes, Alderman Bloomfield.
I just wanted to say that Mr. Merridew hadn't simply turned up tonight. He had actually made a significant effort to be able to appear today, and thought he could, and then found he couldn't. So I think he's quite grateful that he's here.
Let's put the motion. All those in favour say aye.
Aye.
Against say no.
No.
Show of hands. All those in favour. Against? Okay, Mr. Merridew, if you'd like to come up and do a very nice, quick 5 minutes presentation, please.
Thank you, Lord Mayor, and thank you for the support of the council. Yes, I'm sorry that I hadn't applied it formally, but when I inquired of your office, I was told this afternoon, no, it was not a good thing. But anyhow, I'm here, and there's some matters that I think I'd like the council to think seriously about. Yes, we've heard earlier this evening of the brutalist type of architecture, and I remember that number 10 Murray Street had to come down because that was a brutalist building. It wasn't in keeping with the Cove. And I'm conscious of whatever decision is made tonight may be a 100-year effect on the Cove. And I go back only 60 years of the last 100 when there was a development proposed, and it was to demolish all of the Salamanca buildings. It was a development approved by the council and by the state government, and there's nothing could be done. Those buildings were going to come down. There was a huge uprising of the people of Hobart against such a proposal, and fortunately they were taken notice of. We have the National Trust, we have the Treasury buildings there, not the Treasury, sorry, we have those of course, but the Salamanca warehouses we have, and thank goodness 1 million tourists a year come to Hobart to enjoy the ambience of Salamanca and the adjoining Battery Point area. So, and I know this council is very respectful of the Battery Point planning scheme, and I understand this is in the on the border with Sullivan Cove. but we all have a responsibility to see that what happens in these areas is not a 100-year detrimentally ugly thing. I mean, clearly, it's always held up that Empress Tower should never have been built, but because it was built, we had the Battery Point planning scheme, and that's protected the heritage here. There are ways of doing things in Hobart, and generally by softening the structure of the building, possibly even making it shorter, as you did with Novotel Hotel, that came down 10 metres because it was too far outside the plan. I feel that the matters raised from the shadowing effect is important. I'm surprised that there isn't a montage here on your television tonight to show the shadow effect that this other representative raised, because sunlight is a matter of health, it's a matter of healthy well-being, and yes, you're going to have some trees, but if you're going to completely or dramatically change the ambience of the adjoining property, maybe the council should be looking very carefully at the potential aspect of that. And yes, the brutalist effect seems to be of concern, not only to me, but also to other witnesses here this evening. Lord Mayor, I've kept that brief. I appreciate the privilege. And a 500-page report is a lot to be digested by this group here. But I think you're very experienced with dealing with Battery Point. There's been just recently the Montpelier Retreat development there, just on virtually opposite the end of Kirksway Place. That's been, I think, has had similar issues. It's been through various planning matters, and it's still going to be a fairly large building. This one, and probably, I suppose, the cottages next door do amplify it. Let's try and soften it if it's possible. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Merridew. Are there any questions for Mr. Merridew? There is one from Deputy Lord Mayor.
Yes, thank you through you to Mr. Merridew. Thank you very much for your deputation. It was good to hear it, Mr. Merridew. Thank you. Just in relation to demolition, because there is some demolition in this proposal, is it your feeling that this is a suitable demolition?
I understand you're referring to the removal of the veranda from the back of number 23, would that be right?
There's a timber addition at the rear of 25.
25, yes.
And
yes, I'm aware of that. And 25 was the original office of the National Trust of Tasmania, formed in 1962 as a result of the public uprising against the potential demolition of the Salamanca buildings. I don't think that's a problem because the building still retains, once that veranda comes down, it's got some nice Georgian door frames and from memory, windows that will be exposed by the removal of that veranda.
And second question, if I may, are you aware that the Heritage Officer has approved this with conditions, as well as the Tasmanian Heritage Council?
I'm not aware of that. I'm only really aware that the Heritage Officer's reported comment in today's paper was that it was a very brutalist building and that it was perhaps a bit too large to be in keeping with the area. I haven't got the exact wording, but I have not found the 500 pages what the Heritage Council. What was their quote, Deputy Lord Mayor?
We'll probably hear from that because we've only just received it, so we'll get that from the officers.
Could I ask a question?
No, I think we've.
Oh, okay,
I think we'll move on. Thank you. No more questions for Mr. Merridew. Thank you. Thanks, Mr. Merridew. Now I think we have the fly-through model from Choi to take us through. I think, did you also mean the others coming from the other way, like heading?
Yeah, that's a good angle there to see the gap between the buildings. Is there a shadow diagram for that choice?
So the red is existing building, the green is the proposed building. So around here, Tom, looking at very hot in the afternoon. September the 23rd. 9 o'clock in the morning. And 2 o'clock. Yeah.
On the boundary, what's this? Is it like buildings currently, or is it just open? Can you tell, or?
So that would be any other use?
Could you, again, just going back to Sandy Bay Road, but directly in front of the three cottages? Yeah. Thank you.
And maybe just on that corner of Gladstone Road and Kirksway Place, but sort of at the footpath. Is it Kirksway Place? Oh, yeah, just down, but on the, yeah, at the, I guess at a footpath level or person level, not. And across the road, I guess, is that? Oh, okay, the next one along? Oh, yeah, the 27 Kirksway from the representors, I think it was. Is that right? Is that
House with the garden in it.
Across Troy to the other Georgian cottage. Nah, next one across. Next one across. Nah, other way. That one. Yeah.
Oh, that Kirksway, right. That's
Around at St David's Park too.
Has everyone seen enough?
Yeah.
Oh, Councillor
Thank you.
Passage.
Oh, yes, I was just going to ask if we could move to questions, if that's okay, for the staff.
We'd need to move, someone would need,
no,
do we need to move
no,
the item
no.
normally? No, okay, sure.
Thank you. So I just have a couple of questions for staff, and it may be pragmatic to have our heritage officer at the table as well, Director, if that's okay.
So Mr Booth's here and he can assist.
Thanks, Mr Booth. There's one question for you, but also some for the Director. So just with regards to dilapidation reports for 27 Kirksway for the neighbours, is it possible to condition a pre-construction inspection and dilapidation report?
Lord Mayor, that is usually a Building Act process, so if a planning permit's granted, then that would normally be the protection of adjoining properties would normally be a Building Act process, although I do note that the Tasmanian Heritage Council conditions do stray into that area, so I think that between that condition and the Building Act processes, that property is properly covered.
So it's safe for the representors that if there is any damage to the neighbours' adjoining property, that they would need to do remedial works at their expense of the constructor. Yep. Excellent, thank you, Director. In addition to that, a planning question to the Director. The representors made mention of a strong street edge being a desirable characteristic within the Sullivan's Cove scheme. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct.
Thank you.
Sorry, through you, Lord Mayor. Those issues are dealt with in consideration of the urban form on page 50 of the planning of the agenda. So if you think of the Cove floor and the very strong buildings that front Salamanca, the very famous strip of buildings, they have that very very close presence to the street frontage, and so that's why this requirement exists in the planning scheme.
Excellent, thank you very much. And just a question to the Heritage Officer, Lord Mayor. There was mention of incorporating existing bluestone into the contemporary building. My understanding is that bluestone wasn't readily available in the Hobart area. Do you have any advice or comments to make on whether or not where that bluestone has come from, whether or not it actually has heritage value, and if, in the Heritage Officer's opinion, it should actually be included in the modern bill?
For you, Chair. The proposal is clearly an artistic expression which is intended to try and soften that particular elevation. I'm not aware precisely the stone, but I am aware that it is intended to actually take it directly from the site. Now, it may well be that this is stone that's been imported into the site and used, but even so, it's associated with the site in that it's previously occupied that site and been used on that site. So under the conditions that we've suggested, it is stated that the elevations that have been shown should be replicated so that there's no reduction of the amount of space that's being proposed, and that the actual final design itself should be agreed by the council. So essentially, if we are unhappy with what is being proposed, if we don't feel that it has merit, then we can resist approving that condition until we have a satisfactory design.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Lobby.
Can I ask a question of Mr. Booth? It doesn't seem that your report talks that much about the sort of the bulk and the visual impact on the streetscape, except that last little paragraph. Is that the only place, am I right that that's the only place you're really addressing the fortress-like wall and its sort of bulk in the streetscape and that sort of thing?
Chair, no, we would consider it from all different locations. However, to a degree, we have to say, well, what is the principal way that those places of cultural importance would actually be experienced? And in this case, it would be from the Kirksway Place and the Sandy Bay Road areas. That's not to say that we don't look at other areas as well, but that is principally how you would experience the best qualities of those particular cottages. With regards to Gladstone, yes, I would acknowledge that it was relatively finely balanced in terms of the merits of it. I didn't particularly want to make comments on the actual architectural design, other than that it's clearly modern, and we have UDAP to be able to do that for us. It is relatively close to the rear elevation of those two cottages, but even so, as you're walking up Gladstone Street, at certain angles you would actually be able to see the rear of those two cottages, and indeed with the removal of the veranda, as I think has been stated, you would potentially see more of the original sort of cottages themselves. In terms of the blank or bulk of the actual building, certainly when actually viewed, say for example that view that you're seeing at the moment, we would say that yes, it's clearly not invisible, it's clearly having some impact upon those cottages, but it is stepped far enough back so that the cottages are not so severely compromised that we would be able to refuse it within the actual planning scheme itself. The cottages remain the principal thing that you would see from that particular visual viewpoint, and I think it would be the cottages that would remain the principal focus, and certainly the heritage aspects of it would not be compromised by the building itself.
So that sort of juxtaposition of kind of a jarring black.
Yeah, for Chair, the planning scheme does actually suggest that new development should be identifiable as modern, as I said, it's not the intention of heritage officers to really sort of provide a commentary on the architectural merits, but in terms of its placement and bulk and height, it's considered that it's not so detrimental that it should be refused.
Any further questions or proposals?
Lord Mayor, I'm happy to move that the officer's recommendation for approval.
Any discussion on that?
A question to Heritage first. I'm just trying to get my head around this setback thing. I read some of our new literature relating to the Hobart plan, the Hobart Central Hobart planning scheme, or the precinct plan. So there is no need or requirement under Sullivan's Cove planning scheme for any setback off the from the footpath. How does that work?
For you, Chair, I think as the Director actually stipulated, it is contained within the schedule relating to urban form and perhaps if I can read it for you. The actual cove is split between what are considered to be primary spaces and what are considered to be secondary spaces. Gladstone Street is identified as a primary space, and for the primary space it says that there should be strong continuous upright walls to the primary spaces, the streets and walls and blocks around the cove edge, and the streets which radiate from the cove. So yes, there are multiple of times where we would say that it is appropriate that there should be a setback so that you respect the original pattern and the traditional pattern, and that you can accommodate front yards, things of that nature. But in this one specific case, because Gladstone Street is identified as a primary space, the requirement of the cove is that it should be built up to the front of the actual site.
Chair?
Councillor Harvey.
Thank you to the Heritage Officer. I'm just thinking of the entire streetscape the way it is. It seems there's been quite an evolution of building styles in that street over time, and quite some substantial buildings. And I'm just thinking this is probably not a question, maybe to make a statement here. But you've got the Salamanca Mews, which is a particular era, the law courts, the building on the corner, whoever's occupying it now, Gladstone and Kirk's Way, that larger building with the round thing on the roof, the heritage buildings, the Georgian, this proposal. So how do you see that, the evolution of that streetscape, if that's a relevant question? Because I see it as a series of evolutionary buildings in that street. Do you sort of see something similar?
For you, Chair, yes, I think that's a reasonable way of summing it up. Clearly, Hobart has been a relatively, shall we say, poor place in comparison to other parts in Australia, and therefore development has been piecemeal, for want of a better phrase, which meant that sometimes that you do get buildings of different periods and different architectural styles sitting next to each other, and I think this is a prime example of that. So whether you would wish to make the comment that this then is a continuation of that process, I think that would be a reasonable way of expressing it.
That's how I'm thinking.
Sorry, also can I just, the Urban Design Panel did actually talk about heritage. I'm not sure whether you've got any thoughts on their comments, where they talk, for example, that they felt that more respect should be given to the context of the adjacent heritage buildings on the same site, and we're not convinced the current design is the best solution.
Chair, look, I know that the terms of reference for UDAP are in the process of changing. There is a degree to which it's instructed that UDAP should primarily restrict their thoughts and comments to the architectural form of the building, and not necessarily stray into things that would essentially be considered by the actual officers of the council. I would say that obviously they're an advisory panel, and the actual final decision or the final recommendation would actually be made by council officers.
I guess, can I ask who will comment, who will provide us with comment on the streetscape and how something sits within, because it doesn't seem that's what your report has done, and nobody is that doesn't seem, the Heritage Council only looks at individual buildings, so who looks at the context of the heritage buildings and how it looks in the landscape, and whether having something as classic as that heritage next to sort of this jarring fortress wall is a sort of good response to the heritage, to respectful of the heritage?
Well, Chair, I would say that clearly UDAP offer advice in terms of the impact on the heritage listed building, the cultural important place. That is primarily our concern. In terms of its wider impact within the streetscape, that is perhaps less of something that we are able to sort of comment upon.
Who does that though?
Perhaps I can assist, Lord Mayor. The scheme is, we've drawn attention to the areas in the scheme that are discretions, and in this case, a key discretion is the urban form, which talks about things like the height and how the building presents to the street frontage, and that's been an assessment done by the planning officers. There's a further discretion relating to urban form and the surfaces that are used on the building. So perhaps the language in the scheme isn't quite what you're expecting. It's very different to the interim planning scheme using a different assessment methodology.
Yeah, I guess I'm just wondering why wouldn't our heritage officers be part of that urban form, have their view on the urban form and how it, I guess picking up on the fact that UDAP seem to be the ones that have raised this issue, and they're, you know, that's a panel of, you know, pretty knowledgeable architects, but I'm just wondering the context of the adjacency of the heritage buildings and the urban form, but I don't sort of, I'm not sure why our heritage officers didn't cover that in their work.
I suspect that comes down to the wording in the scheme and the requirements that have to be met. Mr. Booth's obviously done a clear analysis against the scheme provisions, and the Urban Design Advisory Panel have provided broad brush type advice, which doesn't necessarily always fit into some of the specific requirements of the planning scheme.
Yeah, I'm just, where's the urban form advice from the heritage officers?
So
there it is. Okay, a little bit there, yeah. Okay, I can see that now. All right, any further questions or comments? Can I ask about the tree? So it's not our tree, obviously, is it? No. And do we? So I think Councillor Harvey talked about sort of offsets for the removal of private trees. That doesn't. We don't have that at the moment.
Our street tree policy, which requires offset for removal of council trees, doesn't apply here.
Hey, Councillor Alderman Bloomfield, I think.
I'm not sure how my point of view comes into play in this particular conversation, but when we saw the 3D modelling of it, it really struck just how different that particular design is to the rest of the street. And I guess I've been trying to work out how to articulate the difference. And I mentioned windows before, and I guess the reason why I mentioned that, and I'll do it again now, is that when you have windows and alcoves and pieces of buildings on a street, it's a way that the houses themselves engage with the street as you walk through. When you have a complete block and there's nothing there and it's very strong, it's tall, you're literally just pushing people away. It's like saying, we can engage here, but you stay away there and then come back over here. We actually have a disconnect, I think, with this design element, and it was very prominent when we looked at this at the 3D modelling. I don't see how this reasonably fits in. I think it could be easily modified to do so by allowing more of a visual engagement, but as I said, putting that into planning language, that's not my forte right now.
Further, Councillor Posselt.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. Look, just my debate on this item. I think that the architects have made, and the proponent have made, a reasonable effort to adhere to the planning scheme, right? For me, the street wall is jarring, it is large. I kind of wish that there was a setback there, and I'm really sad to see such a large 18-metre canopy amphora deleted from our landscape. And, you know, I'd encourage elected members to consider how we can protect trees better in these circumstances moving forward. But they're consistent with the planning scheme, and that's what we're here to do, is to assess it against the planning scheme. Gladstone Street is a pastiche of many different architectural forms, from curved glass buildings down to, I don't even know what the appropriate terminology would be for the sandstone buildings on the corner, the law courts, which are modernist across the road, a number of high, like medium-rise apartment blocks, large apartment blocks abut this street. This is particularly jarring because it is next to the Kirksway Place cottages. It's next to the Georgian cottages. So when considered in the context of Kirksway Place, it kind of jumps out as going, oh, this is not appropriate. But if you actually venture down Gladstone Street or look across the road at Gladstone Street, it's actually pretty consistent with the majority of the architecture that is built in Gladstone Street, and that would be consistent with the way that the planning scheme is written, which we want large street walls
against the boundary edge, because that's what everybody else has done on this street. And yeah, I completely agree that you know, I would prefer to see this softened with trees, and I'd prefer to see it set back, but that's not what the scheme says, and I'm not an expert planner. I guess the only commentary that I would add to officers is that we've conditioned in some artwork in this large piece of concrete, and I would really encourage officers to shoot high, and to the proponent to shoot high for what you can do here to really get the best outcome for such a large street wall. It could work, it could be good, but aside from the street wall, the bulk, its siting within its block is pretty good. It's pretty appropriate. We've seen shading diagrams that show that there's minimal effect to surrounding, and we've seen the impact from Kirksway Place, and it is pretty minimal for the size of the building. And when viewed from Gladstone Street, it is consistent with all the buildings on that street. So that's why I've moved it for approval, bearing in mind that we are the planning committee, not the council in this instance, and when comparing it against the desires written within the planning scheme, because I know that we all seem to have a problem with the street wall, that a strong street edge is written into the scheme, that's a key consideration when we're judging this application against the merits within the planning scheme.
Further discussion?
One more. Yep. Just a little bit of detail about the forecourt. I see it's got permeable concrete pavers, and I'm just interested in that space and how that will be utilised. There's no gate at the front, so it's open to the, you know, for people to wandering into the forecourt there. So firstly, it's how will that be secured if necessary? Would there potentially be another DA for a gate across the front of it, you know, or a fence or whatever? And secondly, the use of permeable pavers I think is very good. I hope they can follow through with that, because when it comes to being able to install them, there might be issues around how that, whether you can or not, whether it's actually a real thing, or whether it's good in theory, but when you get to the practice of it, it's much more challenging, because I've gone down that path before.
Sure.
It's not my understanding that that would be a public space. That answers your question. And in terms of the permeable pavers are proposed from time to time. They're not necessarily ideal, but do allow for some stormwater movement.
Filtration, yep.
And you know, they're better than surfaces like gravel, which would track onto the road. So I think, you know, as I can't really add much more other than officers reviewed it and they're happy to recommend approval on that basis.
But I guess that space and people wandering in and out of it, because it looks like it might be a public space because it's got a big open front.
That's not my understanding, but that might be a question for the applicant if that's...
Yeah. No, it's probably just it's not an important question. I'm just curious about how that space will function once, if this gets built, and there's a big gap between the buildings that are inviting. Yeah.
Further
relevant,
discussion?
I guess, to the DA.
Deputy.
Yeah, I was going to comment that I think that that gap between the cottages and this proposed building is actually a good feature, so I'd welcome it. Look, I think there was comment about the facade, and we're not here to design this building. It is architecturally designed. It may not suit everybody's aesthetic, but I think that it is suitable for this site. There has been obviously a plan to build on this site over many years, and let's hope that this is a lot more acceptable. And it's 5 more apartments, so I'll happily support this application.
Further discussion, Councillor Kelly.
Thank you, Chair. Look, this is one of these real gnarly applications we get to see here, and really the only way we can make a final decision is seeing it being built, and of course that's not never going to happen. That would be the day of truth with such a structure as this. I look around the street there, and straight across the road you've got a 5-storey building straight to the curbside, up and down the whole street, similar buildings. truly, surely, of course, this does not got to reflect in any way, shape or form the old building, and it does not do that. I really am struggling with this, and I guess when I get to a situation like this, I will defer to the expert opinion from Council's Officer and Heritage that of what their opinion should be on it. So I do have some reservations, but in the context of it, I will support the Officer recommendation. Thank you, Chair.
Further discussion?
Well, I just want to just make this point. Architecture is not necessarily trying to always go forward with what is there in a particular era. I remember a heritage architect saying to me once that sometimes designing something that's completely different in an area is actually enhancing the architecture that's already there and existing. So if we want to sit there and try and have all designs look similar or use materials that blend in with some lovely cottages next door, you're actually probably taking away and detracting from those cottages. Because that's the important component here of the era of those cottages. The wall there, I've looked at the walkthrough. I really don't see the building at all over impacting anywhere. There might be a little bit of shading at different times, but that's the reality of everything we do, and particularly in places like Salamanca and Battery Point. So I don't necessarily feel that the development over impacts on the area, and I believe the design doesn't detract from the cottages at all whatsoever.
Okay, any further comments? Okay, I might make some comments. I think sometimes one element of a building can be its undoing, and I think this is a classic case of that. I think it's, there are so many elements to the building that I find perfectly fine, perfectly within our planning scheme, and respectful to the important Georgian cottages next door, but the wall is going to be what everybody sees, and the wall is different. It's a strong street edge does not mean a wall. It means, it means coming straight up to the street edge. It means probably, that distinctive Georgian style, but it doesn't say no windows. It doesn't mean no doors. It doesn't mean just a wall. Walls are very, they're a very strong statement in a culture, in a street, in a planning scheme. And I think when the designers of the Sullivan's Cove planning scheme put it together and they talked about a strong street edge, I don't think they were talking about black walls. I think they were talking about strong design, strong right up to the edge, but, still just a little cut out with sort of no other sort of sense of human sort of contact. I don't think was what they talked about when they talked about the strong street edge. I would have liked to have seen some windows or some livability a bit more than this, and I totally respect our urban design panel on this. They say that they would have liked to have seen the bulk broken down and felt it could have been done to alleviate the current fortress-like quality onto Gladstone Street. And unfortunately, because of that one negative element of this design, I feel like I'm going to use my discretion to say that I don't think those strong street edge urban form interpretations are ones that I would agree with. So the urban form elements of the Sullivan's Cove planning scheme are discretionary. Obviously, there are views from planners and others that have used their discretion in one way. I think the panel and my discretion aligns more with the panel, that the big wall is a mistake in an otherwise, very nicely designed and appropriate scaled building. The height and bulk of it, apart from the wall, I don't have concerns about. But as I mentioned, I think one element of a building can be its undoing, and I think the bulk, the fortress-like bulk of this wall, is the problem that the panel have picked up on. I don't agree that all of the Gladstone Street buildings look like this. There is no Gladstone Street building that has a wall with no windows. There's nothing. I'm also not. I didn't approve those particular buildings, which were obviously done in a particular. So I can only look at the ones that I'm looking at today, but I can't see a particular building in Gladstone Street that has such a dominant sort of soulless wall in a way that I don't think is quite in keeping with the urban form that was intended in the Sullivan's Cove planning scheme. So unfortunately, even though I like the rest of the building, because of the wall and the nature of it and the visual impact of it and the message it sends to the streetscape, I can't support the officer's recommendation on this occasion. Okay, any further comments? I'll put that. All those in favour say aye.
Aye.
Against say no. No. Show of hands. All those in favour? And against? Okay, thank you everyone for coming. We'll now move on to our next item. So that's number 7, Joynton Street, 2 multiple dwellings, and we have a representation from Mark Green. If Mark would like to come forward. Hi Mark, would you like to?
Yes. Yes, thank you, Lord Mayor. So I'm the owner of the property that is directly opposite the right-of-way for this one for the application. I'd like to say at the outset that I do support a dwelling going on that bit of land, but my concern is around the poor design of the footprint of that, such that it leads to a difficult entrance and egress from the right-of-way onto Honora Avenue. Honora Avenue is a very narrow road, and it's constricted by my boundary fence, which is the road boundary, and that's approximately 3.6 metres away from the entrance. Honora Avenue is a 2-way road with a dog leg in the middle, meaning that vehicles entering one end cannot see vehicles entering the other. And this requires vehicles to need to pull off Honora Avenues to let others pass. And they usually pull into the driveways that are along Honora Avenue. It's a regular occurrence that drivers have been unable to manoeuvre their vehicles when reversing out of those driveways to continue their journeys, including this right-of-way. And this is the same manoeuvre that's proposed in the traffic impact assessment in the application, and that's regularly caused damage to my boundary fence and other boundary fences along Honora Avenue as well. And just as a little aside, probably about 10 or 12 times, and not once has anyone contacted me or left a message in my letterbox or let me know that they've actually hit the boundaries fence. So every time I've had to, at my own expense, repair that fence. So it's a bit difficult for me to understand how you would design this space so that every time you either enter or exit that right-of-way, you have to do at least a 3-point turn, unless you were simply trying to maximise the space of that land so that you could sell it for a higher price or a higher rent. Having that entrance or exit that requires a 3 or more point turn every time will certainly increase the number of times that vehicles impact my fence. And there's absolutely no margin for error. In addition, vision along both directions of Honora Avenue is difficult from that right-of-way when reversing out as well. So it will be difficult to see cars coming along that right-of-way. Just for councillors' attention, looking at the drawing, it seems of that 3-point turn, it seemed that it's based on a vehicle approximately the length that the road is wide, so about 3.6 metres. And that's actually smaller than a 2000 model Corolla, so a very small car. And for comparison, the top 2 selling vehicles in Australia, the Toyota Hilux and the Ford Ranger, are over 5 metres long. So that's going to increase the difficulty of making that turn safely without further damage, even more so. So I'd just like to say that I fully support the council officer's view that this application should be rejected for that basis, and there are some other bases in there as well. But yes, I am very concerned about the potential for continued damage to my boundary fence. And I have children who play in that backyard as well, and I'm concerned that a vehicle might actually enter my property through that fence if someone isn't able to control their vehicle sufficiently. Thank you.
Deputy Lord Mayor.
Thank you. Through you. Thank you very much for your deputation. And it would be terrible to think that fat cars might be the reason for not for not supporting this application. But to your mind, is there any alternative to this subdivision and additional dwelling and access apart from Honora?
So I think there is some potential in the front of the house that adjoins, that it's on Joynton Street, but I'm not sure how they're then proposing to access this actual dwelling. So unless you significantly reduce the footprint of the usable area, if you like, of what they've proposed, such that you might allow vehicles to turn within their own property, but you would also need to widen the access point to enable them to swing out without having to do a 3-point turn. And what the drawing doesn't show is that the vehicles can turn either way up that right-of-way. They can go right or left. So you have to allow the possibility for the 3-point turn as it's designed in both directions.
Thank
you. Councillor Posselt.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. Through you, I think I might have 3 questions for you, sir. Have you seen the amended proposal with a widening of the access? Has that come to you?
No, I was only able to look at this last night, so...
That's fine. Yep, no problem at all. The second question, how many vehicles do you think per hour Honora has?
That's an interesting question. I mean, at times it does get busy because there's the hospital right nearby, there's schools, people take a bit of a shortcut through there to get to from Augusta Road down through to other parts of Newtown. So it does vary. I would make the point too that it's a 50km/h zone as well, and cars do drive quite quickly up and down there. Not always stopping at the entrances and exits as well. So at times it does get busy, and we regularly see cars having to either reverse up or down the right-of-way or pull off, as I've said, because they're facing a vehicle that's coming the other direction.
And the final question, I suppose, is, would consideration of one-way, converting Honora to one-way, alleviate some of your concerns about manoeuvring in this space?
Look, on a minor level, but I think the road is just not wide enough, and I think why would you design a place that has to have a 3-point turn every time you either come in or out? That just seems a bit a poor design for me. Just follow up too, I have spoken previously to the council about making it one way, and the council hasn't, or council officers haven't really followed through with that. Thank you.
Can I ask a question? The traffic engineer's report for the developer was just saying that this is already used by vehicles.
The actual owners of those properties would only use it very infrequently. What tends to happen is, as I've said, cars meeting in the middle of Honora Avenue need somewhere to pull over to let other vehicles go past. So they tend to use the right-of-way to pull off, and then it's usually them reversing back out, continue on their journey, that's causing the damage to our fence.
Yeah, it just says the right-of-way is existing and has been in continuous use for many years without issue. The right-of-way is currently services 2 residential properties.
Yep, that may be so, but to be honest, I've never seen a vehicle from the owners moving in and out of that right-of-way. So while it might be in continual use, the actual amount of use, I think, would be very low.
Okay. Thank you. Any further questions? So, proposal?
Lord Mayor, I'll move the officer's original recommendation, which we had 2 weeks ago. It looks like there was an attempt to try and modify the driveway, but there's still other issues that have been identified by the officers, and the recommendation is still for refusal. So I'll move that.
Discussion or questions? Councillor Posselt.
Yeah, thank you. So just reading through the amended plans, Director, I know that staff have said that this would constitute a secondary application. Should this be refused tonight, would this then just be a subsequent, could this then be a subsequent proposal from the proponent?
Through you, Chair, yes, they could make a subsequent application. Alternatively, they could appeal. The tribunal has broader powers to amend than the council has via conditions. But as we said in the memo, even if they did do that, we wouldn't support that as a proposition.
Thank you. So the likely, it's possible that this could go to tribunal rather than a secondary application and be mediated out is a possible outcome.
Through you, Chair, yes, that is possible.
So can I just ask about the the Midson report is just it's not considered a credible one, is it, or just a different perspective on the?
Chair, we have Keith Burton, who's our Senior Development Engineer, here to assist us with the technical questions. Maybe, perhaps, Keith, if you could come forward to the table.
Thanks, Keith. No, it's just around the proponent's traffic management report. Kind of is a bit like there's no real issue here.
Yes,
in terms of
through you, Chair.
The
So
right-of-ways already accessed. Would only generate a small number of vehicles and.
yeah, so as the gentleman already mentioned, the traffic impact assessment states that there are no current issues with the right-of-way, but that's not true. If you go through the report, you'll see all the damage caused to this gentleman's fence from the use of that right-of-way. And that's why the TIA, or the traffic impact assessment, was, I guess, incredible or not that valid in that sense, that it had taken those existing conditions and not, I guess, assessed them in an adequate level.
That hasn't recognised though, and we've got a record of all those other incidents. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's also, it's clear by the photos and the impacts into his fence that is occurring. So yeah, when the traffic impact assessment states that there are no existing issues, it raises alarm bells.
Okay, thank you. Any further discussion? Councillor Posselt.
Have you had a chance to review the amended plans?
Yes, I have.
Do you believe that alleviates, I know that there's not a full assessment done, but do you believe that alleviates some of the issues with three-point manoeuvres getting out of the resident?
It may alleviate some three-point measures, but the rest of the proposal, it changed all of the other layouts and it made everything else worse. So it band-aided one scenario and it forced all the other scenarios into really non-compliance.
Which are the other scenarios?
So like the garage is no longer functional due to the gate, so cars now won't be able to leave the actual site. So that's pretty clear to me that, yeah, it's not going to be functional as a layout. There is sufficient room and area there to provide an application or a development proposal that would service a multiple dwelling and still be able to access off the Honara Avenue. However, the applicant hasn't seemed willing to, I guess, change their way in what they've proposed. Yeah.
Deputy Lord Mayor.
Just one more question. So, so essentially you've had a lot of to and fro with the applicant and discussions as to what might work, but still, even with this change, it's not flying in your opinion.
Through you, Chair, yes, it's still not meeting the scheme or the standard that we would require for some development like this.
Yeah, Lord Mayor, I can't support this application. I think the refusal, as it stood last week or last time we considered it, was suitable, and I have no evidence that anything much has changed. So it's disappointing that whilst council officers have worked quite hard to get a better outcome, it just isn't getting through to the applicant, unfortunately.
Okay, if there's no further discussion, I'll put the recommendation for refusal. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Against say no. Carried unanimously. Okay, I think we'll now move on to 6.2, I think, is that right? Yes. Which is 48 Nicholas Drive.
Close the application, Chair.
Moved by Deputy Lord Mayor. Is there any discussion?
Only with regard to the amount of material that will be cleared. So they need to clear our area to get their fire management plan signed off.
Through you, Chair. Well, it is marked as clearing council land, but that part of our land is actually already actively managed as a fire break. So the practical reality is that the applicant's not going to have to do that work.
They're just going to use it as a response to the requirement.
Through you, Chair. Yeah, this is quite a tricky space. Once people get to the building phase and they have to get sign off from a bushfire hazard management practitioner and a building surveyor to say that they have the right to clear certain land, and I suspect that's why they've preferred to go with this this expansive approach.
But I didn't actually see the green bit. I couldn't quite see the plan in detail where they were talking about needing to use our land.
This has come to us because it involves use of council land.
Council land, which is not a road reserve, correct.
And it's already cleared as a fire break. Yes. So there's nothing to be added to it or removed from it. Okay.
When you say use a fire break, some of our fire breaks still have trees on them. Would that be?
My understanding, Lord Mayor, is that the standard that is required by the Bushfire Hazard Management Plan is the same standard that we're already clearing the relevant area of land. So, but the difference is that this would essentially grant some rights. I mean, we would still normally separately grant consent for people to go onto our land and actually do the work. But yes, so I think that's why they've included this in their application. So
what rights does it give them just to do they take on the responsibility of maintaining that fuel break now?
No. I mean, as we always say, when we grant general manager consent, we consent to somebody lodging an application. We're not actually consenting to them doing the work. So technically there would be another stage of approval if they were planning to actually do this work. The reality is that since we're already doing it, I doubt that they'd actually apply to do so. Perhaps I can take elected members to page 398. I'm just looking at the concern that shows the area being cleared.
I'm just trying to work out.
Line.
Will trees have to be removed?
My understanding is that no, they won't.
Could we get clarification of that? Because it does say that there's trees to be removed, and there are little pictures of trees. It's all a bit. Has our environmental planner had a look at this? Or?
Yes, he has.
Is that somewhere?
The environmental planner report starts on page 457. But he would
Is
not...
that attachment B or, sorry?
Excerpts from page 379 in the agenda. Environmental planner and from the open space planner.
Paragraphs 7.4 and 7.5 is the analysis by our environmental planner and also our open space planner who would normally assess applications on council land.
What page is that again?
379.
What's the HMA?
Hazard management plan or hazard management area.
So you're suggesting no additional work will need to be conducted because we've already complied with as a fire break.
Okay. Any further discussion? With that, all those in favour say aye.
Aye.
Say no. Carried unanimously. Bushfire zone, I just don't really like that.
Yeah.
Well, you know, bushfire prone zone, what are we doing? Anyway.
Yeah. Death for a death.
All right.
Really?
Next item is...
I move that the advertised applications.
any discussion?
No.
Any of note?
Note?
Yes, through you, Chair. Two.
Number 2?
No, not number 2. Two in total. The first is item number 22, which is 23 Nelson Road, which is Coimbra Oval, which is a fairly extensive $2.9 million council project to upgrade the change rooms and the toilets and some associated works there at Coimbra Oval. That will be coming to committee probably on the 17th of January 2024, first committee meeting for the new year. And the last one is also a substantial cost of works application, 3.6 million, item number 31, which is the St John's Hospital at 30 Cascade Road and demolition of part of the existing Glenville House building, refurbishment, extension to provide a variety of mental health facilities. So at the moment, it's currently on advertising, only 2 representations received, so if we don't get any more, it'll be a delegated decision. If we get more representations, then it'll obviously come to committee in the new year.
I just want to also note that we've just lost 2 elected members, so we've still got a quorum though, but Councillor Alderman Zuko and Councillor Elliott have left the meeting. Deputy Lord Mayor?
So is that St John's, is that for palliative care and a wellness centre?
Through you, Chair, it identified sort of two different types of mental health facility, really. One, struggling to remember the terminology, my recollection was that for people to stay overnight and also just for people to come in and go. Yeah.
Through you, Lord Mayor, on the Calvary plan, was there heritage buildings associated with that?
Through you, Chair, that's a good question. I didn't check that. It's right at the Wentworth end of the site. I think the whole site is listed, but whether or not it is a building of significance on that site, I don't know.
Understood, that's fine. The second question I had relates to Victoria Tavern, which is item 12. Just a query, is that an entire strata title that's being a change of use?
Through you, Chair, yes. So it was approved as residential, but it's been converted to visitor accommodation. I think it's still under construction, so it's never actually been used for residential, but the proposal is to change it.
Can we have that come to committee, please? Can we have that come to committee? Thank you.
Okay, we've had that moved. All those in favour say aye.
Aye.
Against say no. Carried unanimously. What is next? Questions without notice? Oh, delegated decisions.
So moved.
Moved by Councillor Harvey. All those in favour say aye.
Aye.
Against say no. Carried unanimously. Responses to questions without notice.
Moved.
All those in favour say aye.
Aye.
Against say no. Carried unanimously. Questions without notice in the open.
None? Okay, good.
I was just wondering about the, there's a interesting building going up out the front of a heritage building on the corner of Barrack and Goulburn Street, a sort of new glass building out the front of a heritage.
Lane Architects, it is. Preston Lane, yeah.
So that didn't come to council. Did that not involve any? Oh, it did come to council.
Long time ago.
Oh, was it? Okay.
They've been doing that building work for ages.
Right. No worries. Good. Councillor Harvey.
I have a question. Could we please consider a policy for representations off the floor? Because since we had, I was happy to have one, but then having two, but I think we do need to be careful that we don't have like a whole group of people turn up and all have deputations without notice.
Is there a big problem that you've noticed?
Well, we just started the problem tonight, maybe. Yeah, I was happy with one. I don't want to see serials, turn up and ask questions all the time. It's just on speculation.
You might need to move a motion for a new policy, though, Councillor Harvey.
Next Monday, whatever it is.
It's
a question.
In answer to that question, I would say, as I said to the Kathy who did the first deputation tonight, I consider that to be a call for the chair. So if you would prefer that to be a different arrangement, then I think that would need to be a motion.
Well, it makes it, no discussion. Sorry, I can't tell you anymore.
Okay, so I think you've received the answer to your question at this stage.
That's not the right answer, I like that, yeah.
All right, if there's no further questions, if I could get a motion to move into the closed. Moved by Councillor Harvey. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Against say no.